Gotham Knights had some definite issues when it launched last fall. A mix of lighting problems, odd technical hangups, and strange design choices undermined what should have been an attractive game. This was made all the worse from comparisons to its 2015 predecessor, Batman Arkham Knight, which was in many ways a more visually accomplished title. But the game's key fault came down to performance. Gotham Knights ran at a highly unsteady 30 FPS, with harsh framerate drops, stutters, and frame time fluctuations. The game felt rough and jerky as a result, particularly when traveling through the open world. For a current-gen only title that was pushing unambitious visuals, this level of performance bordered on unforgivable. After 5 months of patches though, Gotham Knights has been hugely improved from that initial version. So is this game finally in reasonable form? And have any of its visual faults been addressed? I'll cut to the chase. Gotham Knights performs much better as of the latest patch than it did during the launch period. Going back to the initial release, it had 3 key performance problems. Firstly, the game was frequently beset by conventional framerate issues. Gotham Knights tended to buckle a bit when traversing through the open world, with harsh drops often characterized by stutters, down as low as 83 milliseconds or so. Performance profiling on the PC version revealed that most of these problems were CPU related, though the game could exhibit more stable, extended performance dips where it did seem GPU bound. Secondly, Gotham Knights had issues with frame delivery. You'd see a mix of 16, 33, and 50 millisecond frames in general gameplay, even when the overall frame rate didn't really fluctuate from 30 FPS. The game never felt truly stable, with bizarre frame time fluctuations that came as a byproduct of their chosen framerate capping method. Finally, the game would occasionally chug with no clear driving factor, like in the train terminals. Gotham Knights had some issues with bugs and general stability, and that extended to some inexplicable problems in select areas at times. These issues made Gotham Knights' 30 FPS framerate target feel messy and sort of broken. It was one of the worst performing major titles on current-gen machines, with obnoxious performance woes that had a constant impact on playability and fluidity. But after a concerted patching effort, the situation has been dramatically improved. Looking at the PS5 release, we're getting close to a locked 30 FPS. Interior scenes play back without any issues whatsoever, absent of the frame time troubles that we observed at launch. The choppy, inconsistent motion has been completely solved here, and we're locked to 30 FPS. It really is a huge upgrade. Open world traversal, where the launch release suffered most, is also very stable. Long stretches run at a perfect 30 FPS even when speeding through Gotham City on the Bat Cycle. I can't say it's completely perfect because there are one-off dropped frames that do pop up every so often, though not more frequently than every few minutes or so. For all practical purposes, open world gameplay just hugs that 30 FPS update. The opening bike chase, which is possibly the most consistently demanding scene in the entire game, provides a helpful illustration. The updated PS5 code is almost a flat line here, with just a handful of dropped frames through the entire sequence, while the launch version goes on a bit of a frame time roller coaster ride. There are extended dips, sharp stutters, and plenty of 16 millisecond frames sprinkled in for good measure on that original code. The new version brings a night and day improvement and is a much more enjoyable experience. The Xbox consoles follow essentially the same pattern. Interior scenes run at a locked 30 FPS, with outdoor scenes not entirely perfect but much improved. Both Series S and X feel much better to play than in their initial forms. Unfortunately, they do lag behind the PS5 release here, despite the enhancements over the launch code. The primary problem comes down to dropped frames during fast traversal. Both Xboxes have the same problem here, a predictable, if somewhat infrequent pattern of 50 millisecond frames when driving at speed. These tend to pop up perhaps every 15 or 20 seconds or so, often clustered around loading thresholds, and intrude frequently enough to be a little bit distracting. Larger stutters can still pop up as well, though again to a lesser degree than in the launch version. If we put the same difficult bike sequence in its old and updated forms, we do still see a transformative framerate boost. When the game is under heavy stress, the improvement is clear. It's really just those momentary loading drops that continue to pose an issue, albeit a much smaller one than at launch. The other Xbox Series issue comes down to some odd animation problems in certain cutscenes. Essentially, object and camera animation run with inconsistent travel at times, which is particularly noticeable during broader movements. Frame rates are locked to 30 FPS here, but the actual underlying animation looks as if it's not being interpolated correctly. Curiously, this issue doesn't seem to be present in the launch Xbox versions or on the PS5. Hopefully this can be fixed, as it is pretty distracting. So the consoles are much more consistent performers as of recent updates, so what exactly has changed? The patch notes unfortunately don't provide many clues. While Gotham Knights has been updated many times since launch day, including patch 4.0, which came out earlier this week, most of the notes are pretty unclear, specifying performance optimizations or improvements. One detail does stand out here though. An early update claims to have implemented dynamic resolution. The launch versions came in at a locked 2160p on Series X and PS5 and 1440p on Series S. The maximum resolutions are the same as of the updated release, though mostly the game continues to come in at those top-end figures. PS5 and Series S both clocked at the same resolutions as before in every shot I tested, while Series X reached a low of 2016p at worst. I wasn't able to get the sort of comprehensive pixel counts that I usually aim for, as Gotham Knights has several image-altering post-process effects on console. Chromatic aberration, motion blur, and depth of field that can't be turned off and strictly constrain the instances in which a raw pixel edge can be easily found. I imagine that the resolution dips more frequently during challenging moments in gameplay, though this would be hard to notice. One predictable solution for performance improvement might be to reduce the game's simulation complexity. The launch version had remarkably sparse NPC and enemy density in the open world, for instance, perhaps a concession to ease CPU load. But in the new version, I couldn't spot any consistent decreases in density at all. I also couldn't find any downgrades to the game's ray tracing, which is present on PS5 and Series X. It seems roughly as detailed as before in the shots that I compared. The ray tracing still makes significant reuse of screen space information when available, and distant geometry is often absent from the BVH structure, but the resolution of the RT is relatively high. That's consoles out of the way, but what about PC? Gotham Knights had some very poor PC performance in its launch release. The game was CPU bound, just like consoles, and was mostly limited by the performance of a single CPU thread during open world gameplay. Gotham Knights also suffered from serious shader compilation issues during the game's early sections. As of the latest patch, the game's performance woes have been largely alleviated. Just take a look at the game running on Alex's mid-spec test PC here. Shader compilation is no longer an issue, as the game pre-compiles shaders during its first boot, and frame rates are much improved during CPU-bound sequences. We're still short of 60 FPS during a lot of the open-world traversal, but frame rate averages have improved by 10 to 15 FPS or so since the initial release. I played through roughly the first hour on my high-end PC on maximum settings at 4K with DLSS 2 in its quality mode, and the game is in pretty reasonable shape there. We're still CPU limited to some degree during select frames when targeting 60 FPS, but the game is mostly a solid 60 here. Lowering the view detail and environmental density settings can help here though, and uncapped performance tends to average around 100 FPS in the open world. I'm not completely happy with the way that performance is scaling on PC, as a consistent 60 FPS is out of reach for most mainstream systems, which feels a bit gratuitous given how this game looks. Plus, the cutscene animation issues do return here, at least at 60 FPS, with jittery movement like on the Xbox Series consoles. But as long as you have a fast CPU with high clock speeds, Gotham Knights can mostly deliver a pretty good experience here, with much improved fluidity over the consoles. After some further reflection, I think Gotham Knights visuals, while largely unchanged in this version, do deserve considerable praise. Ultimately, Gotham Knights is best understood as a game of two halves. The first half is the game's mission environments. Basically, anytime you start a major mission, Gotham Knights loads into a space that features pretty solid visuals. Lighting is a particular standout in these environments. Each of the game's interior spaces features very attractive ambient lighting with excellent GI and well-placed light sources. Technically speaking, it's basically par for the course with big-budget Unreal Engine 4 titles, but it often looks excellent. There's plenty of fog, volumetrics, and smoke in these areas as well, which gives them a sort of organic quality. The assets also impress here. Again, this isn't exactly generation-defining stuff, but geometric density and texture resolution are both suitably high. The artwork here holds up well at close range, and the game itself has a lot of asset variety with key story areas showcasing very different interior stylings. If you just evaluated Gotham Knights on the indoor segments alone, it would seem like a very good looking game. A lot of effort has clearly been expended to make these spaces look unique and attractive, with capable rendering technology combined with carefully crafted artwork and visual design. The other half of the game is set in Gotham City itself, and this is really where the game's visual issues become apparent. A lot of my concerns here come down to the game's lighting quality. Gotham Knights open world does have a lot of light sources, but ambient lighting basically seems non-existent. Lights are often surrounded by large spaces of very dark color, as if each light has no contribution to the overall scene lighting. My broad impression is that GI is largely missing in the open world environment. It's hard to escape the feeling that Gotham Knights lighting is broken, with stark, contrasty lighting that lacks the sort of information needed to build a convincing lighting setup. It feels especially curious because there is an attempt to showcase indirect lighting properties elsewhere, as you see light scatter through the game's atmospheric fog. Gotham Knights also features some fairly prominent hero lighting, which takes the form of an omnipresent highlight that follows the player character, and tends to look odd juxtaposed against the game's urban areas. A quick look at other modern titles makes these deficits especially clear. Marvel's Spider-Man has very attractive ambient lighting, even during nighttime scenes, reliant on a probe-based GI system. The lighting isn't exceptionally detailed, but for the typical scale and speed of the game, it's more than sufficient. Even something like Batman Arkham Knight has much more pleasing lighting than Gotham Knights. Again, when you have these bright light sources during darker conditions, they should contribute in a plausible way to environment lighting. Gotham is also home to some of the more bland gameplay elements in Gotham Knights. A lot of the open world gameplay consists of scanning for and defeating specific enemy types, which is a tedious sort of hide-and-seek exercise given how sparse the criminal groups are. The game's bat cycle also feels ponderously slow, taking ages to traverse the game's broad city streets. It really feels like the open-world gameplay was designed around a more relaxed set of technical constraints, with a streaming system that would permit much faster traversal, a denser placement of in-game NPCs, and proper large-scale world events. You get the sense that there's probably some underlying hang-up here. Perhaps the game assets were designed with a lot of unique elements that made them difficult to stream, for instance, or possibly Unreal Engine 4 itself is throwing up some obstacles. Gotham Knights open world segments are really where the game looks and plays its worst, which is unfortunate considering that so much of the experience unfolds on the streets of Gotham City. Gotham Knights still has obvious visual issues that will probably never be properly addressed, but performance has been profoundly improved since the launch release. PC is way ahead of its initial showing, with much better typical frame rates, and the consoles manage a much closer 30 FPS lock as well. PS5 in particular is just about where it should be, with an almost unblemished 30 FPS update in my testing. Gotham Knights CPU limitations mean that a 60 FPS update would be difficult to implement for console players, but the game feels totally reasonable now that performance is relatively consistent. If you're itching for an open-world superhero fix, Gotham Knights now offers a perfectly decent experience, with much improved performance from the launch code. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and press the bell for YouTube notifications. Check out the Patreon at digitalfoundry.net for exclusive and early access content. And to get in touch, just use Twitter. Thanks for watching.